Hi guys, welcome to Lecture 5 of the Digestive System. And this is a pretty shocking photograph of a patient with jaundice. And we left off talking about liver function and liver disease and how one of the common symptoms of a liver disorders are jaundice, and that's the accumulation of this yellow pigment called bilirubin. That's easy to diagnose. And so remember that the liver does all kinds of stuff. It has endocrine and digestive functions. It synthesizes lipids. It stores sugar. It releases sugar. It modifies amino acids. It breaks down nucleotides and stores them. And it also is what filters all your blood. So the blood from your GI tract is going right to your liver through the hepatic portal vein, and that gets cleaned up so that it can be sent out to the rest of your body. And if it doesn't, you can have all kinds of issues. Here you see another fighter targeting the liver and his opponent, and he makes a very nice kick right on that costal margin. That's where the liver protrudes. You could palpitate, touch your own liver there. And then underneath there you see Tyrone Biggums, and Tyrone's a character done by Dave Chappelle, and he's a methamphetamine addict. And you can see one of the things he's doing is scratching and scratching and scratching. In fact, a lot of liver issues, that's another symptom, is profound itchiness. In fact, there's a genetic condition called Alagille syndrome. One of the problems with it are liver disease, and that's it, itchiness. So all these toxins can accumulate in your body. And any good herbal medicine person would say that if you're itchy, you got some liver issues. Well, the liver filters blood and it returns blood to the heart through the central arteries that become the hepatic arteries that end up dumping into the vena cava. As it's filtering that blood, it creates something called bile, and bile's carried down those biliary canaliculi to the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is this little bag, this bladder that's associated with the liver, and it's always denoted with a greenish color. And if you were lucky enough to be part of my club, you could actually see the surgery and see that in fact it does have a greenish color to it, and that's because bile accumulates waste products, and one of those waste products is due to the breakdown of hemoglobin, the pigment in red blood cells. And when you break down hemoglobin, you get bilirubin. Bilirubin is a yellow pigment, and that's what gives rise to jaundice. If you don't have good liver function, you can accumulate bilirubin in your blood, and you turn yellow. The bile has a combination of water, bile salts, cholesterol, and then electrolytes. And you're not going to lose all those salts and electrolytes. You're going to reabsorb them later. We'll talk about that then. But bile itself is really useful in the emulsification of fats. So an emulsification is really what detergents do. So bile salts acts as a detergent, right? And if you have a really fatty meal, the gallbladder will actually be stimulated to contract, which bladders do, or empty, and dump some of this bile in there, and that'll help you digest fats. And so when you break down those fats, you can absorb cholesterol, and then all those fatty soluble vitamins like vitamins E, D, A. So one of the common diseases of gallbladder are gallstones. Okay, so for some reason, some people, well, it can be genetic predisposition. It can have something to do with your diet. They accumulate bile salts and they condense or accrete into these stones, which are made up of a combination of cholesterol and bile salts. And those stones can accumulate as sludge at the bottom of the gallbladder, not cause you too much problem. But as those stones get big enough, they can eventually get stuck down in the biliary duct. Okay, so remember that the common bile duct dumps out in the duodenum, and the common bile duct's also associated with the pancreatic duct. Okay, so if I get a stone up here It's painful, very painful, and it can cause the backup of bile, right, which will affect the release of bile will turn me yellow. If I get a bile stone down further along, down towards where the pancreatic duct is, I can really have some multiple big problems. I'd be impeding the flow of bile, but I could also be impeding the flow of pancreatic juice, and that's a bad. Anyway, gallstones. They're formed of cholesterol and bile salts. Bile salts are detergents that help break down fats, and so when you eat a fatty meal, you might experience what's called dumping syndrome, right? So if you go to the McDonald's and you get yourself a nice Big Mac and fries and a shake and you eat it, that food will digest in about 30 or 45, or that'll be broken down in the stomach in 30 or 45 minutes, and then it'll enter the duodenum, and your sensory chemoreceptors in the duodenum are going to say, hey, boy, oh boy, this guy just ate like 3,000 calories and half of it's fat. Really terrible fat too. These, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, and so that'll actually cause the release of something called cholecystokinin. It's a hormone that stimulates the contraction of the gallbladder. Does a bunch of different stuff. Cholecystokinin, and it'll relax these sphincters here, and bile will be dumped in there, and all that detergent will be dumped onto the fat, and it'll make it nice and loose, and it also can stimulate contractions if it's enough fat for you to loosen your bowels up and go right to the bathroom. So anyway, this is all under the control of the vagus nerve. Remember, this is an autonomic function. Again, gallbladder dumps bile into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. Remember that I'm also dumping pancreatic juice there as well, and so that's the gallbladder. So remember that liver diseases can take on a lot of symptoms. Not only will you turn yellow, but you can have really dark urine. Your stools will be affected. You can have pale, loose stools, steatorrhea, or black stools. And then there's all kinds of changes in the cardiovascular system because of the inability to move blood, right? You can accumulate edema all over in your legs. And remember, one of the bad places for you to have edema and hypertension is in that portal vein, the vein that comes off the intestines, and leads to those esophageal varices. All right. So how do I get liver disease? Well, one of the easy ways is through a virus. And there's 5 types of viruses that infect and cause disease. And what these viral cells are affecting are the hepatocytes. And so when I have this viral infection, I get hepatitis. That's the inflammation of the hepatocytes, damage to the hepatocytes. There's a bunch of them, A through E, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, etc. We're going to talk about B and C because they're the ones that have the biggest effect, and they're the ones that are real sort of common if you're a IV drug user, or maybe you're a nurse or doc. Remember probably told you guys that back in another lifetime I was a medical sales rep, and we sold clinical diagnostic equipment and reagents to hospital reference laboratories. So everybody in the hospital gets their blood drawn a couple times, and all their blood samples go to the pathology lab, and you have technicians there testing blood. And if you're in a big city hospital, back in the 80s when I was working there, if it's a big enough laboratory, you would take those patients' bloods who are like potentially AIDS patients or hepatitis patients, and they would have their own table because it would be super contagious. So anyway, Hep B, Hep C are super contagious, and they can cause liver damage. And the problem with liver damage is it's a big deal, right? So Hep B can be short-term or long-term, and spread through blood, and sexually transmitted. And of course, if you treat it, if it's picked up, you can avoid long-term damage to the liver But if it isn't, and lots of times these hepatitis infections are asymptomatic or poorly diagnosed, you end up with cirrhosis. And the same thing's true for hepatitis C. And I sort of remember that C is a little more deadly than B. Anyway, cirrhosis. Cirrhosis is a terrible disease. Cirrhosis of the liver results from damage to those hepatocytes. One of the things the liver does in compensation for damage to the hepatocytes is to replace the damaged tissues with either scar tissue and or fat, and so that impedes the ability of the liver to filter blood effectively, and you end up with fibrotic liver, and then a cirrhotic liver, and then liver cancer if you live long enough past the cirrhosis. So anyway, a couple conditions that are associated with cirrhosis are jaundice, right? And you have all kinds of other things going on, but at the end stage, you have this condition called ascites, and this is this accumulation. Remember that if the liver can't filter the blood quickly enough, I'm going to have edema, swelling, and this is a picture of somebody who's in very, very deep water here. This is ascites, and it's accumulation of fluid in the peritoneal cavity, and as a result of cirrhosis. All right. Of course, one of the common ways people get cirrhosis is through alcohol abuse, and so there's all kinds of terrible effects on alcohol, but the liver's the one that takes the brunt of it. Remember, the liver does sugar metabolism, and alcohol's got all kinds of sugars in it, right? It's got ethanol, and when your liver picks up on the fact that you've got ethanol, it shuts down all kinds of sugar metabolism, causing all kinds of other issues. Anyway, that's cirrhosis. Of course, you can have genetic conditions like hemochromatosis. And in hemochromatosis, it's a genetic condition where you accumulate iron. You don't get rid of the iron, and it turns your skin a darker color. It's also associated with some arthritic conditions as well. So that's a patient with hemochromatosis. You can get cirrhosis or fatty liver disease just through your genetic predispositions as well. Some people just are going to accumulate fat in the liver if they have a diet that's high in fat that can cause it. You can have some autoimmune diseases that attack livers, and then they're all going to lead to cirrhosis. And of course, anytime you continue to damage an organ, you run the risk of having cancer develop. All right. So remember, cancer generally is the result of multiple insults from the environment. You might have a genetic predisposition to develop cancer, but if you smoke and you drink and you have a high fatty diet, those are all environmental insults that stack the load on cells, and eventually those cells can cause cancer. Liver cancer. The liver is a very durable organ, but liver cancer has a pretty poor prognosis. You're going to have this cirrhotic circumstances, and of course, when the end happens, you have a liver failure, and liver failure leads to septicemia. Septicemia is the blood poisoning. It's global blood poisoning, and it's a very painful way for you to die. So liver failure leads to other organ failure because the body accumulates all these toxins, which damage the kidneys, and then they damages the heart, and you have this positive feedback loop of organ failure. And so there you go. And we'll get to the small intestine next time.